The alien jungle was never silent. Its trees always whispered in the wind. Its strange birds always called from high branches. Its insects always sang from the shadows. But tonight everything was still, the air heavy and thick like it was holding its breath. Even the smallest leaf refused to move, and that was when Commander Alex Reed knew something was wrong. Something deep in his bones told him to listen closer, to look harder, to prepare himself. He was the only human on the planet Valor. The rest were Valorians with tall, thin frames and silver eyes. Their fur-like skin shimmered faintly in the moonlight. And though they lived in harmony with their world, they feared the great northern storms more than anything. Alex had been repairing a broken power relay at the colony outpost when the first deep rumble rolled across the ground. It was not like normal thunder. It had a slow, heavy weight to it, a sound that seemed to push into his chest, making his ribs ache with every echo. The sky above the mountains to the north was glowing faint silver, not the glow of moonlight, but something strange, as if the clouds themselves were lit from inside by cold fire, and the wind carried a faint metallic taste. The hairs on Alex's arm stood up, and he knew this was the storm the Valorians spoke about in low voices, the storm that could strip the bark from trees and turn rivers into boiling foam, a storm that no Valorian would face unless there was no choice at all. Then the comms on his wrist cracked alive with sharp static. A voice came through, shaking with panic. It was Elder Tvar, leader of the main Valorian settlement. His words came fast, broken, but Alex caught the important part. The cubs, they are gone, lost in the storm. They will not live through the night. The sound of the elder's breathing was loud, almost painful, and then silence, only the low hum of the storm filling the channel. Alex straightened, his mind racing. The cubs, that meant the young ones, small and fragile, not yet strong enough to run fast or climb high. They were the children of the clan leader himself, and if anything happened to them, it would not just be a family tragedy. It could mean anger, division, even war between the clans. The cubs had wandered out during the last clear hour, chasing each other into the hills, and now the storm was between them and home. The Valorians would not cross it there. Bodies could not handle the freezing wind and razor dust that filled the air. Alex looked around the outpost. A few Valorian warriors stood there, their eyes wide, their hands tight on their spears, but none moved forward. None spoke the words, "I will go." And in that heavy moment Alex understood that all of them were waiting for him. The human who did not share their weaknesses, the outsider who had no family here but still would not turn away, the one who had walked into fire on other worlds and returned. The wind howled once more, stronger now, rattling the metal walls of the outpost, and far off lightning streaked sideways across the sky, lighting the silver clouds from within. The ground seemed to hum under Alex's boots, and somewhere in that humming was a pulse, a rhythm, almost like a giant heartbeat. It made the jungle trees shiver, their black leaves turning edge on to the wind as if hiding from an unseen hand. Alex pulled up the rough topographic map on his visor. The cub's last known position was marked with a flickering red point far to the north, near the broken ridges that dropped into the ravines. The fastest way there cut straight through the storm's edge. No shelter, no cover, no safe ground. The long way around would take too many hours. The cubs did not have that time. The cold alone would take them long before morning. He thought about the storms he had faced before on Earth and other worlds, sand that could skin a man in minutes, ice that could freeze a breath before it left the lips, heat that could melt boots into the ground. He had survived them all because humans had something stubborn inside, something that made them keep moving when every bone said stop. And right now that stubbornness was the only thing that could reach those cubs. The elder's voice came again on the comm, softer this time, almost breaking. "No one can cross, human. It is death." Alex looked toward the glowing sky and answered without speaking into the comm. "We will see." He strapped on his reinforced boots, pulled a survival cloak over his shoulders, checked the seals on his breather mask, and tied a coil of climbing line to his belt. His fingers moved fast, smooth from years of doing this kind of thing in worse places than this. Around him the Valorians watched in silence, some with respect, some with doubt, a few with something close to fear. Alex felt their eyes on his back, but paid them no mind. This was not about pride or proving anything. It was about 3 small lives somewhere out in that storm, Lives that did not yet know the world could be cruel. Lives that had trusted the adults around them to keep them safe. And if no one else would keep that trust, then he would. He stepped out into the open. The wind hit him like a living thing, cold and sharp, tugging at his cloak. The silver glow ahead seemed brighter now, pulsing with the deep roar of the clouds. Somewhere out there in that moving wall of death, three small shapes were waiting, lost and alone, and the human who would not turn away began to walk toward them. One step, then another, into the storm's breath, into the place no one else dared go. The storm ahead was not waiting. It was already moving, swallowing the northern hills in its silver glow. The light inside it was flickering in strange patterns, like giant shapes were shifting in the clouds. Alex knew he had no time to think about what those shapes might be. Every second he stood here was another second the cubs spent out there alone. Another second the cold crept into their small bodies. He adjusted the straps on his pack and stepped forward, feeling the wind push back at him, like an invisible wall. Behind him the Valorian warriors called out warnings. Their voices were thin against the roar of the storm. They told him about the razor dust that could slice skin, about the wind bursts that could throw a grown fighter into the air, about the lightning that could leap sideways from the ground to the sky. But Alex kept moving, his boots sinking into the soft mud, each step leaving deep prints that filled with water almost instantly. He knew fear was trying to settle in his chest, but he forced it down. Fear was for later, now was for action. The path to the cub's last known position cut through a narrow valley. Its steep sides were covered in black vines that moved slowly in the wind like sleeping snakes. Water ran down from the cliffs in thin streams, and every drop hissed when it hit the ground. Alex tasted the air and felt a bitter tang on his tongue. The storm's dust was already here, tiny metal flakes carried by the wind, each one sharp enough to scratch his visor if it hit at the right angle. He tightened the seals on his mask and kept going. A sudden crack of sound like the tearing of steel split the air, and the ground shook under his boots. Ahead of him a section of the valley wall broke loose, sliding down in a slow, heavy wave of rock and mud. He stopped for a second, judging the path. There was no safe way around except to climb over the fresh slide, and every part of it was unstable. He climbed anyway, hands gripping wet stone, boots searching for holds. The mud pulled at him with every move, heavy as chains, but he made it to the top and slid down the other side, landing hard on one knee. Pain flashed up his leg, but he pushed through it. There was no time to check injuries now. His visor scanner flickered with static. The storm's energy was making it unreliable, but he caught brief flashes of the cub's heat signatures in the far distance, faint and moving slowly. Maybe they were trying to find shelter. Maybe they were just too cold to move fast. Either way, they were alive, for now. That single fact gave him another surge of strength. He leaned into the wind and pressed on. The valley opened into a wide plain. The grass here was tall and sharp, slicing at his cloak as he moved through. The silver glow in the sky was brighter here, casting strange shadows on the ground. Alex noticed the shadows moved even when he stood still, shapes that didn't match anything around him. Too large, too fast. He realized the storm wasn't just air and dust. It carried living things inside it, things that moved like predators using the storm as their cover. The thought made him tighten his grip on his plasma cutter. The small weapon hummed faintly in his hand, ready if needed. Halfway across the plain the wind shifted, hitting him from the side, carrying with it a low sound that was almost a growl, deep and long, the kind of sound that made every instinct in his body want to stop and hide. But stopping was not an option. He kept walking, scanning the grass ahead for movement. He caught a glimpse of silver fur low to the ground. Not one of the cubs, but something bigger. The moment it saw him, it sank back into the grass, gone from sight. He didn't know if it would follow or not. So he quickened his pace, every step taking him closer to the base of the hills. At the edge of the plain he reached a broken stream bed. The water was black, thick with dust from the storm. The stones along the bank were slick and shifting under his boots. He used the climbing line to pull himself across, the current tugging at him hard, threatening to pull him under. But he kept his balance and made it to the other side, breathing hard inside the mask. The storm was louder here, the air colder, his visor fogging for a moment before the heater cleared it. Now the ground began to rise, the path narrowing between jagged rocks. The wind funneled through these gaps with such force it felt like invisible hands were trying to push him back. Each step forward was a fight. His muscles burned. His arms ached from gripping the rocks to keep from being blown over. But every few minutes he checked the scanner and saw the faint blips of the cubs still ahead, still alive, and he refused to stop. The higher he climbed, the stranger the light became. The silver glow now mixed with streaks of green and violet that danced across the clouds. The patterns moved like waves on water, and with each shift they seemed to hum in the air, not just a sound but a feeling in his bones. The Valorians had said the storm was alive, that it had a mind of its own. He had thought it was just a legend, but here in its heart he was starting to believe they might be right. A sudden flash lit up the path ahead. Not lightning from above, but a bolt that jumped from the ground to the sky. The crack of it was so loud it rattled his teeth, and in that moment the scanner went dead, the display blank. Now he was moving blind, no readings, no guide but the faint hope that the cubs were still close. He adjusted his course by memory, using the landmarks he had studied earlier, the sharp bend in the ridge, the twin rocks shaped like teeth, the deep cut in the cliff where water had once flowed. The wind brought another sound now, high and thin, almost lost under the roar, but his ears caught it, a cry, faint and trembling. It came again, and this time he knew. It was a cub, somewhere ahead and to the right. He moved faster, slipping on wet stone, catching himself with one hand, pain lancing through his arm but ignored. The cry came again, closer this time, pulling him onward. He found himself at the edge of a narrow drop, the bottom lost in shadow. The sound of the cub was coming from down there. He anchored the climbing line to a rock and began to descend. The rope swayed in the wind, scraping him against the cliff face, sharp edges cutting at his cloak. Halfway down, a gust almost tore him free, but he held on, teeth gritted, boots searching for a foothold, until finally he reached a ledge wide enough to stand on. There, pressed into a shallow hollow under the rock, was a small shape, silver formatted with dust, eyes wide and bright with fear. It was one of the cubs, alone and shivering. Alex knelt, speaking softly, letting the cub see his face through the visor. He reached out slowly, wrapping the survival blanket around its small body. The cub made a soft sound, not quite a purr, but something close. He could feel its tiny heartbeat against his arm, fast but strong. This one would live if he could get it out in time. He looked up the cliff, the storm above roaring like an ocean, the rope swaying wildly. He knew climbing back with the cub would be harder, heavier, but there was no other choice. He secured the cub to his chest, tightening the straps so it could not slip, and began the climb. Each movement slow and deliberate, the wind pulling, the rock shifting under his boots. But he kept going, thinking only of the cub's breathing, steady and warm against him. The storm was now a living wall behind Alex, its silver glow spilling into the valley ahead. The air was colder than before, and every breath inside the mask felt heavy. The cub he had rescued clung to his chest under the survival blanket, its small head pressed against his armor. Its heartbeat was quick and steady, but Alex knew there were still two more cubs out there somewhere in this madness, and the storm was not slowing for anyone. He had no choice but to keep moving, following what little sense of direction he had left. The ground under his boots had changed. The soft mud of the valley was giving way to something firmer. The stones here were darker, almost black, and they shone faintly in the strange light, as if what though no rain was falling here. Alex crouched to study the surface and saw faint indentations, small and round with three-pointed tips, the marks of Valorian cub paws, and they were fresh, the edges not yet blurred by the wind. His chest tightened. They had passed here not long ago, maybe. Minutes, and that meant he might be close enough to reach them before the cold or the storm's creatures did. He moved quickly now, keeping low to avoid the worst of the wind, scanning the ground for more prints, each one leading him deeper into a winding pass between tall stone pillars that rose like broken teeth from the earth. The light here was strange. The pillars blocked the silver glow in places, making patches of deep shadow where the air seemed thicker and the sound of the storm grew muffled. Alex's instincts told him this was both good and bad. Good because it meant the cubs might have taken shelter in here. Bad because it also meant predators could be using the same shadows to hide. Halfway through the pass, he stopped suddenly. There in the mud beside the small paw prints was another track, much larger, almost twice the width of his hand, with deep claw marks carved into the stone itself. The edges of the track were sharp, fresh, and the spacing told him the creature that made it had long legs and a stride built for sudden bursts of speed. He had heard the Valorians speak of KRYTH beasts, hunters that moved like shadows and could tear through armor with a single swipe. If this track was from one of those, then the cubs were in even greater danger than the storm itself. The wind shifted again and carried with it a smell, sharp and metallic, mixed with the faint scent of wet fur. Alex felt the cub in his arm stir slightly, its ears twitching as if it too had caught the scent. He tightened his grip on the plasma cutter in his free hand and moved forward carefully, every step silent on the damp ground, his visor light low to avoid drawing attention. Ahead the pass curved sharply to the left, and beyond that turn the paw prints grew closer together, as if the cubs had been running. He turned the corner and froze. Up ahead in a shallow hollow beneath an overhanging rock were the other two cubs, huddled together, their fur matted with dust, their eyes wide in fear. One of them whimpered softly, but did not move toward him, and in that moment he understood why. Because between him and the cubs, standing almost perfectly still in the shadows, was the KRYTH beast. It was larger than any predator he had seen on this world, its body low and lean, its fur a dark gray that almost blended into the stone around it. Its head was narrow, with long jaws lined in glinting teeth. Its eyes burned with a pale green light that seemed to see straight through the shadows. It was not looking at the cubs now. It was looking at him, its gaze fixed, its tail low and twitching slowly from side to side. Alex knew enough about predators to recognize the stance. This was the moment before the leap. The wind carried dust between them, the silver particles catching the glow of the beast's eyes. Alex's mind raced. He could not fire the plasma cutter without risking the cubs. The blast could kill them or bring the storm's lightning down into the pass. He needed another plan. He shifted his stance, slowly moving sideways to make himself a harder target, his boots scraping the stone just enough to draw the beast's attention fully to him. If he could pull it away from the cubs, they might have a chance to escape. The beast's muscles tensed, and then it sprang. The movement was a blur. Alex dropped to one knee and brought the plasma cutter up in a wide arc. The beam hissed as it cut through the air, missing the beast's head by inches, but close enough to make it veer off to the side. It landed against the rock wall with a sound like cracking bone, shaking dust loose from above. Alex used the moment to shout sharply at the cubs, waving them toward the far end of the pass. The sound of his voice seemed to break their frozen fear, and they bolted, small paws skimming over the stone as they vanished around the corner. The KRYTH beast recovered fast, its claws scraping the wall as it turned back toward him, its lips pulled back in a silent snarl. Alex stepped backward slowly, keeping his cutter raised. The wind outside the pass roared louder now, the silver glow flickering wildly, and with it came another sound, low at first but growing, the same deep hum he had felt in his bones before. It seemed to pulse through the rock itself, and the beast hesitated, ears twitching as if hearing something only it understood. Alex took the chance to retreat, moving toward the corner where the cubs had fled. The beast followed, but slower now, its head turning toward the glow outside, as if something there had caught its attention. The hum grew louder, vibrating in the air like a living thing. Alex did not wait to find out what it meant. He reached the end of the pass and saw the cubs ahead, waiting just beyond the mouth of a narrow ravine, their small bodies pressed against the rock as the wind whipped around them. He hurried to them, checking quickly for injuries. The older of the two had a shallow cut along its side, but nothing life-threatening. He pulled them close, wrapping the survival blanket around all three cubs, their small bodies trembling against him. The rescued cub from earlier made a soft sound as if trying to comfort the others. Alex felt a brief surge of relief, but knew it would not last. The storm outside was growing wilder, and now there was a predator behind them that might return at any moment. The hum from the storm became a deep rolling sound, almost like a voice speaking in a language he could not understand. The cubs pressed closer to him, ears flat, their eyes darting toward the silver light spilling into the ravine. Alex knew they could not stay here. The storm's edge was moving fast, and soon it would be on top of them. and with it whatever had made that voice-like sound. He had no clear path yet, but staying still was worse than moving, so he adjusted his grip on the cubs, one arm cradling two, the third held tight against his chest, and stepped into the wind once again. The air outside was a swirl of silver dust and green light, the sky above shifting like liquid metal, the ground shaking with each pulse of the storm's strange energy. Alex kept his eyes low, watching for more tracks, more signs of the beast, but for now the path ahead seemed clear. He moved quickly, feeling the weight of the cubs, but pushing forward with every ounce of strength left in his legs. The storm's voice followed them, growing louder with each step, and somewhere deep inside Alex began to wonder if the storm itself was watching, if it knew that a human had dared to steal life from its grasp. The wind was now a wall of sound pushing at Alex from all sides, carrying the cold sting of the silver dust and the low hum that seemed to live in the storm's very bones. The three cubs were pressed against him, their small claws gripping at his armor, as he pushed forward into the shifting light. The ravine opened into a wide hollow, and the air here felt heavier, as if the storm itself was pressing down on the ground, making every step harder and slower. Alex could feel eyes on him, though he saw no movement at first. The strange green light from above slid over the stones, casting jagged shadows that shifted even when nothing moved. He remembered the large tracks he had seen earlier and the brief fight in the pass. He knew the chaotic beast was not gone. No predator like that gave up so easily. It was watching from somewhere, waiting for the right moment to strike again. And this place, with its twisting walls and uneven ground, was perfect for an ambush. The cubs gave soft warning sounds, their ears flicking toward the far side of the hollow. Alex followed their gaze and saw a faint shimmer low to the ground, like heat rising from stone. Though the air was freezing, he knew it was the beast's fur catching the strange light, blending so perfectly with the rocks that it almost vanished. If not for the occasional twitch of its tail, it was circling slow and patient, blocking the easiest way forward. Alex's mind worked quickly. He could not fight it here, not with the cubs so close. He needed a distraction, something to pull the beast's focus away. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small emergency flare, its casing scratched from years of use. He twisted it once, and it hissed to life, a burning red light, flaring bright in the gloom. The beast froze, its green eyes narrowing on the sudden color. Alex threw the flare high and far, letting it land on the rocks. To his left the light bounced wildly, painting the walls in violent red. The whitish beast turned toward the flare, its muscles tensing. Then it moved, a blur of gray and shadow leaping toward the false prey. Alex did not waste a moment. He lifted the cubs higher against him and ran toward the opposite side of the hollow, his boots slamming against the stone, his breath loud in his ears. The wind clawed at him, trying to slow him, but he pushed harder, weaving between jagged boulders. The ground began to slope upward, leading to a narrow ridge that curved along the storm's edge. From here the silver light was almost blinding, streaks of green and violet tearing through it like veins of fire. Alex kept his head low, guiding the cubs along the ridge. The path was only a few steps wide and dropped sharply on one side into blackness. The roar of the storm below rose up like an ocean of voices. A sudden crash behind made him turn. The beast was back, its fur streaked with red from the flare's dying light. It had ignored the distraction sooner than he hoped. Now it was coming fast, claws digging into the stone as it leapt over the boulders. Between them, its eyes locked on Alex and the cubs. Alex felt the muscles in his arms tighten. He could not outrun it here. The ridge was too narrow and the drop too steep. There was only one choice. He shifted his stance, letting the cubs slide down into the crook of his arm, and pulled the plasma cutter into his free hand. He could not swing wide here without risking the edge, but he could time it. He watched the beast stride, counting in his head the rhythm of its leaps as it closed the gap. The hum of the storm matched the beat, like a drum, growing faster, until the beast sprang. Alex stepped sideways just enough to avoid the full weight of the impact, his cutter flashing up in a tight arc, the blade of energy slicing through air and fur. The beast howled, a sound that shook the ridge. Dust falling from the rocks above it landed awkwardly, skidding toward the drop, its claws scrambling for grip. Alex moved past it fast, not waiting to see if it fell. The cubs clung to him, their eyes wide but silent, as if they understood the danger was not over. The ridge narrowed even further ahead, twisting upward toward a jagged outcrop of stone that jutted into the storm like the prow of a ship. The wind here was violent, pulling at his cloak and threatening to unbalance him. He leaned into it, each step deliberate boots, scraping against the rough surface. The hum in the air deepened until it felt like the stone itself was vibrating underfoot. The cubs shivered at the sound, pressing their heads against him. From behind came the scrape of claws. The beast had not fallen. It was following again, slower, but still relentless. Alex could hear its low growl mixing with the storm's voice, the two sounds almost blending into one. The ridge ahead split into two paths, one leading higher toward the outcrop, and one sloping downward into a darker, narrower cut in the rocks. Alex chose the downward path, hoping the walls would give them some protection from a wind and maybe slow the beast's approach. The cut was steep and filled with loose stones that shifted under his weight. The cubs whimpered softly as he adjusted his hold to keep them safe. The light here was dim, only thin threads of silver reaching down from cracks above. The air was thick with the metallic dust, and the hum of the storm echoed strangely off the walls, making it hard to tell which direction sounds were coming from. Halfway down, Alex heard a different sound, a faint scraping like something moving against the rock. Not the beast this time, but something smaller, quicker. It came from above him, and when he looked up, he saw shapes crawling along the cracks, long thin limbs ending in hooked claws, eyes glowing faint blue in the gloom. They moved in silence, but their numbers were growing, filling the narrow space ahead and behind. Alex realized he had stumbled into the nesting ground of another predator, one that used the storm's cover to hunt in swarms. He could not go back. The KRH beast would be waiting above, and forward meant moving through the swarm with the cubs in his arms. He shifted his grip on the plasma cutter, setting the charge to its widest short burst to keep from hitting the cubs. The first of the creatures dropped toward him, claws reaching, but he swung upward, the beam slicing through the narrow space. The creature fell back, screeching. The others hesitated at the sound, and in that pause Alex pushed forward, stepping over loose rock and the twitching body of the fallen predator. The cubs stayed quiet, their small bodies tense against him. The swarm began to follow, but not too close, as if testing his strength. He kept moving, using the cutter to keep them at a distance. The path widened slightly ahead, opening into a cavern where the storm's light spilled through a hole in the roof, painting everything in shifting silver and green. Alex paused here, catching his breath, the cubs looking around with wide eyes. The light revealed another path leading upward on the far side of the cavern. If he could reach it, they might escape, both the swarm and the KRH beast. But the hum in the air was stronger here, almost like a heartbeat pulsing in time with the flickers of light. And as he stepped toward the path, the cubs made soft, uneasy sounds, as if they too felt that something alive and aware was watching from within the storm itself. The freezing water clung to Alex like the grasp of some unseen ghost trying to drag him deeper into the black abyss of the canyon, and his muscles ached from the shock as the icy current wrapped around him with a strength that seemed to squeeze the air from his chest, while the roar of the storm above mixed with the thunder of rushing water around him, and every second in the torrent felt like a fight to keep his mind focused and his body moving, because stopping even for a heartbeat would mean sinking beneath the swirling dark. With one desperate pull, Alex hauled himself toward the jagged wall of the canyon, where roots jutted out like skeletal fingers, and his numb hands closed around a slick vine that felt ready to snap with his weight. But somehow it held, and inch by inch he dragged himself from the water, his soaked suit clinging to his body like a second skin, heavy and cold. The sound of rain and wind so loud that it felt like the whole planet was screaming. As his visor light cut through the sheets of rain, he saw it there in the narrow hollow under the broken root of an ancient tree. Three small shapes pressed close together, their fur matted and dark from the wet, the soft tremble of their bodies barely visible in the gloom, and one of them lifted its head, the faint glow of alien eyes catching the light for only a moment before lowering again, too weak to even make a sound. Alex's breath caught not from cold, but from the sharp twist in his chest, because these were not just missing cubs, these were fragile lives standing on the knife edge between survival and the endless dark. And as he reached them, he felt the smallest one slump into his hands with no strength to resist, its fur icy against his skin, and its breathing so shallow it almost wasn't there. Quickly he unfastened the survival blanket from his pack, wrapping it around all three, the silver fabric catching what little heat remained, and he pulled them close against his chest to share his own warmth, though the cold in his bones made it feel like he had nothing to give. But he would not let them go, not for the storm, not for the fear in the back of his mind whispering that they might already be too late. The ground shook under his knees as a new blast of wind tore through the canyon, and above him the jagged outline of broken trees shifted with a crack, like splintering bone, sending debris crashing down around them, and in the distance a sudden flash of light turned the night to day for one blinding instant, followed by the sharp burning smell of ozone as lightning struck somewhere too close. The air grew hotter for a moment, and Alex turned his head to see the edge of the canyon glow with flickering orange, the fire racing through the trees as the wind pushed it faster than any living thing could run, and his mind calculated in an instant the worst truth of all: the storm was turning its path, pushing the fire toward them and cutting off the route he had planned for their escape. There was no time for thought, only movement. He lifted the smallest cub into the sling across his chest and took the other two into his arms, their tiny claws gripping at his suit as he rose to his feet and began moving up the slope slick with mud that pulled at his boots and made every step a fight for balance. The rain lashed against his visor so hard he could barely see more than a few feet ahead. The wind screamed in his ears, carrying with it the deep rumble of falling trees and the strange inhuman roar of the storm itself, as if the planet were alive and angry, and he pushed forward, driven by something deeper than fear, the stubborn human refusal to let the dark win, no matter how impossible the odds. The path narrowed to a thin ledge along the canyon wall, the drop below lost in shadow and rushing water, and his boots slipped more than once, sending stones tumbling down to vanish into the noise. But each time he steadied himself, his arms tightening around the cubs, their small bodies pressed against him, trusting him in a way that made the weight on his shoulders feel heavier and lighter all at once. Another blast of heat rolled over him, and he risked a glance back to see the fire leaping from tree to tree, the glow turning the storm clouds above into a shifting ceiling of red and black, the rain hissing as it struck the flames, but not enough to stop them, not enough to buy him more than minutes. He reached a break in the canyon wall where a fallen tree formed a bridge across a chasm no wider than 10 paces, but the wood was slick and trembling under the force of the wind, and he knew one wrong step would send them all into the void below. Yet standing still meant the fire would reach them before they could move again. So he took a breath, shifted the cubs in his arms, and stepped onto the tree, feeling it bow under his weight, but holding. Step by step he crossed the bridge, his body swaying with each gust of wind and the sound of cracking wood beneath him, but he kept moving, his eyes fixed on the far side, until at last his boots struck solid ground, and he stumbled forward into the shelter of a narrow ridge that blocked the worst of the wind. There he paused just long enough to adjust the blanket around the cubs, their breathing still shallow but steady, and he told himself that as long as he could hear those breaths, no matter how faint, they were still fighting, and so was he. But the ridge ended in a wall of rock slick with rain and too steep to climb without both hands free, and that meant finding a way to secure the cubs where they would be safe for a moment while he made the climb and pulled them up one by one. Yet the thought of leaving them even for a few breaths made his chest tighten, because the storm was alive with hidden dangers, not just the fire and wind, but the creatures that thrived in the chaos, hunting in the noise and shadow. Somewhere behind him, above the sound of the storm, came a low rumbling growl, deep and hungry, and close enough to feel through the ground, and Alex knew they had no time left. The race against the storm had become a race against the predator that had been following them from the moment he entered the canyon, and now it was closing in with every heartbeat. The storm grew angrier with each passing breath, and the fire behind them roared like a living monster, while the flooding waters rose at their feet, and the cubs clung to Alex with tiny claws that dug through his torn suit. But he did not care, for their fear was greater than his pain, and the safe route back to the colony was now gone, swallowed by flame and river and falling earth, leaving only the path ahead, a nightmare called the glass cliffs. The glass cliffs were walls of stone so smooth and so wet that even Valorian adults avoided them in dry weather, and now the rain turned them into shining sheets of danger, where one slip would mean death for all. Yet Alex knew this was the only way to survive, because the fire would reach them soon, and the water below was pulling entire trees away like sticks, and if they stayed here, they would vanish into the storm forever. He pulled the oldest cub close and told it to carry the smallest on its back, while he lifted the middle one into the sling he made from his blanket and survival straps, and then he turned to the cliff and began to climb, feeling the sharp bite of rock edges under his gloves and the weight of life pulling on his shoulders with every move. The wind screamed around them, pushing at his side and trying to throw him away, and the rain washed over his visor until he could barely see yet. He kept climbing, finding tiny holes where his fingers could cling, and pressing his boots into cracks so narrow they hurt. And he kept his breath steady, because panic would shake his hands, and there was no second chance here. Behind him the cubs made small frightened sounds, but he told them to hold on to him, and not to look down, and he thought of all the mountains he had climbed back on Earth, all the cold places, where a single mistake meant falling. Yet this was worse, because it was not only his life at risk, but 3 small hearts that trusted him to get them home, and that trust burned brighter than any fear in his chest. Halfway up the cliff, a deep roar rose from below, and Alex knew, without looking, that the HFY beast had followed them through the fire and flood, for such creatures feared nothing when they hunted, and the smell of the cubs must have driven it into madness. And then he felt a sudden shake in the stone as something heavy leapt upward. A flash of claws swept past his boot, scraping deep into the sole and almost pulling him down, and one cub cried out in terror, but Alex slammed his other boot into a crack and pulled them higher with a strength he did not know he still had, while the beast fell back into the shadows below, only to roar again. He could feel his muscles tearing and his gloves wearing thin as the stone cut into him, but the top was still far away, and the rain was growing colder, turning into hard ice pellets that bounced off his visor and stung his face, and the cubs began to shiver harder, which told him they were losing heat fast, and if he stopped now, they would not last the hour. Step by step he fought upward, his boots slipping once and making his heart hammer, but his grip held, and the weight of the cubs never broke his focus, for he imagined the faces of the Valorian clan if he failed, and the silent fire that would burn inside him forever if he returned alone, and that was a fate he could not accept. The cliff seemed endless, but finally a faint ridge appeared above, like a line between stone and sky, and he forced every last bit of strength into his arms, pulling himself and the cubs up until his knees found solid ground, and he rolled them onto the flat top, gasping for air as the wind still tried to push them, but here at least there was no sheer drop. The cubs lay against him, breathing fast, but alive, and Alex checked them quickly, feeling the steady beat of their hearts through the thin fur, and knowing they could still make it if they kept moving. So he rose again, though his legs felt like heavy stone, and began to guide them across the ridge, toward the faint light in the far distance, where the colony waited beyond the storm. Every step was slow, and the ridge was narrow with jagged rocks that cut into their feet, but Alex did not slow, for behind them came another roar, and the sound of claws scraping stone, telling him the HFY beast had found another way up and was hunting them still, and the fire was following too, carried by the wind up the cliffside. The light ahead grew brighter as they walked, but the beast was faster, and soon its shadow stretched across the ridge ahead of them, blocking the path, and Alex knew there was no way to go around without falling. So he told the cubs to stay behind him, and he picked up the largest rock he could find, though it felt small in his hands compared to the creature's size. The HFY beast stepped forward, its eyes glowing in the storm light, and its mouth opening to show teeth like curved blades, but Alex stood his ground between it and the cubs, and in his heart he felt no fear, only the same fierce stubbornness that had carried him this far, and with a shout that was swallowed by the wind, he hurled the rock with all his might, striking the beast in the jaw and making it stagger back. It roared in rage and charged, but Alex sidestepped onto a narrow ledge, forcing it to follow, and when it did, the ledge cracked under its weight, sending the beast tumbling down into the darkness below, its cries fading into the sound of the storm, and then there was only the wind and the pounding of his own heart. He turned to the cubs, who were staring at him wide-eyed, and told them it was over, though he knew it was not truly over until they reached safety. So they kept moving along the ridge until at last the path began to slope downward toward the valley, where the storm seemed weaker and the fire could not follow, and in that moment Alex knew they had a chance, and that was all they needed. With the cubs close behind and the storm still roaring above, they descended slowly into the shadowed valley, where faint shapes of shelter began to rise through the mist, and though the night was not yet done, Alex felt in his chest that the impossible path was behind them, and the rest was only endurance and will. And humanity had never lacked either. The valley spread before them like a hidden world untouched by the fire above, and the storm softened into a heavy drizzle that soaked the ground in silver light, while the cubs stumbled from exhaustion, yet refused to let go of Alex for even a moment, and he guided them across the wet earth, toward the dark outlines of shelter that promised warmth and safety. The path wound between tall stones carved by time into strange shapes, like the frozen faces of giants watching in silence, and each step felt heavier than the last as Alex's body demanded rest, yet his mind refused, for he knew that stopping now would let the cold creep in and claim them, and that was a battle they could not win in their state. At last they reached the mouth of the cavern, where faint light flickered deep inside, and the smell of smoke and cooked roots drifted out, telling Alex that life was here, and that perhaps the colony had sent a rescue team, though he could not be sure, for this place was unknown to him, and the shapes of the entrance looked different from any human settlement. He stepped inside, keeping the cubs close behind, and the warmth of a fire wrapped around them like an invisible blanket, driving out the worst of the chill, and in the glow he saw figures rise from the shadows, tall Valorians with spears and cloaks of woven fibers, their eyes sharp and unreadable as they took in the sight of the humans soaked in rain carrying their young. For a moment no one spoke, the only sound the drip of water from his suit and the crackle of the fire. Then one of the Valorians stepped forward, their cloak brushing the stone floor, and their voice deep and slow, asking how a human came to carry the future of their clan across the storm. Alex told them everything in plain words about the flood and the fire and the cliff and the beast, and how the cubs had clung to him when all other paths had closed, and as he spoke the eyes of the Valorians shifted from suspicion to something harder to read, and when he finished there was a silence heavier than the mountain itself. The tallest Valorian stepped forward and placed a clawed hand on Alex's shoulder, not in threat but in recognition, and declared in a voice that filled the cavern that the debt owed to this human could not be measured in coin or trade, for he had carried not just 3 young ones, but the heart of their people through death itself, and such a thing could not be forgotten. The clan brought food of roasted roots and rich broth that smelled of herbs unknown to human worlds, and wrapped the cubs in thick woven blankets, while Alex sat by the fire and let the warmth soak into his bones, feeling the tremor in his hands fade, though the memory of the climb and the beast still burned in his mind like the afterimage of lightning. They gave him a place to rest in a hollow near the fire, and as he drifted into sleep, he heard the cubs breathing softly nearby, their small forms safe for the first time since the storm began, and he thought that perhaps he could finally close his eyes knowing he had done enough, yet part of him remained alert, ready to wake at the faintest danger, for the habit of survival ran deep. When dawn came, the storm had passed, and the sky over the valley was painted in pale gold and soft violet, the kind of beauty that seemed impossible after such a night, and the Valorian leader came to Alex with news that messengers had reached the colony, and that a path through the hills was now safe for travel. The cubs would be returned to their family with honor and ceremony, but the leader said that Alex would not leave empty-handed, for the debt of life was not a small thing among their kind, and they presented him with a blade unlike any he had seen, forged from a metal that caught the light in shifting colors and balanced so perfectly it felt like an extension of his arm, and they told him it was a symbol of the bond now forged between their people and him. Alex accepted the gift with quiet respect, for words felt too small for the weight of what had been shared, and the leader promised that wherever he went on this world or any Valorian world, he would find doors open and allies willing, for his name would be carried in their songs for generations. They set out together toward the colony, moving through the now calm landscape, where the scent of wet earth hung in the air, and the fires of the night before smoldered far behind them, and the cubs walked beside him with small steps, glancing up at him often as if making sure he was still there, and each time he met their eyes they smiled with the shy trust of those who had seen the worst and survived. When they reached the colony gates, the air was filled with voices and the rush of people coming to see the return of the cubs, and among them stood the Valorian family, their expressions breaking into joy and tears as they ran to embrace their young, and in that moment Alex felt a quiet satisfaction that went deeper than pride, for it was not glory he sought, but the simple truth that lives once nearly lost were now whole again. The Valorian leader spoke to the colony in a voice that carried across the gathered crowd, telling the story of the impossible path, and the beast, and the storm, and naming Alex as not just an ally, but kin by deed, if not by blood, and the people cheered, though Alex only bowed his head, for such honors felt heavier than any medal, and he knew the real reward was already in his heart. Days later, when the repairs to the colony were complete, and the trade routes safe, again Alex prepared to leave for his next journey. Yet the Valorian leader came to see him off, bringing a small pouch woven from bright fibers, and inside was a single crystal clear and flawless, and they told him it was a token of passage that would let him call upon the Valorian clans anywhere in the galaxy, should he ever need aid, for the debt of life was eternal in their law. Alex took the pouch and placed it inside his suit, feeling the weight of it not in mass, but in meaning. And as he stepped onto the path leading away from the colony, the cubs ran to him, one last time pressing their small hands into his before letting go, and watching until he was gone from sight. The road ahead was unknown, as always filled with new worlds and new dangers, yet Alex carried with him, now more than survival skills and gear, he carried the unbreakable bond of a people who had once been strangers, and were now something far greater. And in his mind the words of the leader echoed like a promise through the quiet morning that some debts are never meant to be repaid, for they are meant to be remembered. And humanity would remember